We were talking today about during this hour about the future of game design education. This is really as much question marks as anything else. So this is not like, we don't have a crystal ball, but we do have opinions. So I want to start just briefly. Well, I guess we can start with introductions. We are missing a few people, and we're going to have a few other people hopefully come in. But Mars and myself are here. Unfortunately, Jess Tompkins, who's a PhD student, wasn't able to be here. She was stuck in North Carolina due to the weather. And James Portnow is stuck doing something horrible, like assigning fresher credits or something. I don't know. Poor guy. But why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself, and I'll follow up.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Mars Ashton. I'm the director and tenure track professor at Lawrence Tech. Can you guys hear me? I'm good. I want to make sure that I'm the right distance from the mic.
Right.
All right. I'm also an indie developer, won an award or two, placed in a lot of exhibitions. So I'm kind of a blend between both the academic and the indie side.
And I'm Mike Sellers. I'm also a blend. I think we see a lot of that. I was actually fully in the games industry for more than 20 years, worked on a number of titles, mostly MMOs and some free-to-play titles. The Sims 2, I was the lead designer on that. It's probably the biggest one I've been on. But a bunch of others, again, that mostly you've never heard of. But I've been teaching, been a professor at Indiana University for about the past 3.5 years. Teaching, we have a game design program that we started about 3 years ago. And so I wanted to give just a really brief recap sort of where we've been with game education. And I've got some questions that we can talk about sort of where it's going. I'd love to hear your thoughts and questions as well. So when I started playing games, there were Tyrannosauruses running around with little arms. I started designing games, which really is a hobby, like most anybody else. In the mid-'80s, I did a paper role-playing game, a whole system, which I now look back on as kind of crazy. And then in the mid-'90s, I started a company and did the first 3D MMO, a game called Meridian 59. At that time, there was no game education at all. I mean, it was just people came into it, people kind of stumbled in, like from out from the cold, And we had a lot of anthropology people and theater people and psychology people, and I had a cognitive science degree and was working as a software engineer. And people just sort of made something and said, oh, hey, I can do games, and you can actually make a living at this. And then gradually there started being more and more undergraduate and graduate and community college kinds of programs that have popped up until now there are more than 500 of these programs in the United States. Some of these, most of these are private or state schools. There are some for-profit schools. We'll talk a little bit about that, as well as still a lot of on-the-job training, though it's shifted in the past 5 or 10 years to the point where no one had a degree to now a degree is really expected. You can still get a job in the games industry without a degree, and just having a degree won't guarantee you a spot in the industry, but it's become much more tilted towards that side of things. We're also still learning, I think, as people in academia and in the industry about what it really means to train people in how to do game design, game development. One of the things I talk with my students about all the time is the difference between playing games and designing games. One of the things I say is, I love eating food, but that doesn't make me a great chef. There's.
You know what's funny? I use the exact same example,
really?
But with architecture. And I'm in a building right now, I own a home, but that doesn't mean I can go and make one.
Stealing that, yes, thank you.
It's funny. It's
anyway, so I think the games education is really at a couple of inflection points. One other thing I'll add, if you were in the earlier panel, you've heard some of this already, but I came out of industry. And I wanted to teach it at a university for many, many years, but I didn't have a PhD because there weren't any PhDs in game design. And I was told for years that without a PhD, forget it, you'd never be able to do it. And I actually set about, it took me almost a decade, but I published some original research work and did some online teaching and built a bunch of experience in doing that and in doing game design that I was able able to convince or perhaps fool Indiana University into bringing me on. But that's been a change in itself, where we have more people now who are in the industry, who are indie developers, or who have made games in the past or continue to make games, and not just people who have read about it. For a long time, we had people who, and even today, still in a lot of schools, there are people who are teaching game design education having never made a game. Which, again, to use a different analogy, is a lot like teaching cinematography when you've watched a lot of movies. It's not the same as doing it. So I guess what I wanted to talk about here today was just sort of where we are and where we're going. And I want to hear things from you all, too, because it helps me in what we're doing and in sort of charting the course for our program about what some of the thoughts and concerns you all have. But let me just start by, I will ask Mars, what do you think we're doing right? And what do you think are some of the biggest things we need to correct?
Probably the biggest thing that we're doing right is bridging the gap, networking. We have so many little networking bubbles of communities throughout the states and beyond. There's a bubble in the Midwest that I've been a part of. I've been very lucky to be a part of. In the last year, now we're an IGDA chapter. Now we have a lot more clout. There's interest in government from Michigan to start to fund things and incubate some of the projects going on. And a lot of that is just a lot of the vets coming in and saying, hey, Michigan doesn't have these types of things. The students need this kind of stuff because they're kind of interested. They want to just better the culture and the industry in that area, or they are teaching at some of the institutions around the area. But I think networking is probably the best. Because ultimately, I tell my students, and I've been teaching for 10 plus years, and this really hasn't changed at all. But there's like 10% of what you can do amounts to you being able to get a job. Like 90% of it is just you being in the right place at the right time and having this stroke of luck, right? Half the time you're not even really going through this like really rigorous portfolio thing. It's like the current gig that I'm at Lawrence Tech in just outside of Detroit, and I didn't get that job by applying. Another student that I had heard about the opportunity and said, "Hey, you're at a really bad place right now." You remember ITC? Yeah. I have a lot of stories about that. I could write a book.
Actually, we'll talk about some of the for-profit things. I'd like to hear about that.
Oh my God, yes.
It may be a little cathartic for you too.
Yeah. But there were a lot of really good students that came out of the program, and the one said, "Hey, Mars, get into a better place." You're the first person I thought of. A week later, after a very casual interview, I was sitting on a lecturer position. But. You also asked the worst thing.
Yeah. What are some of the? Yeah, I was trying to go for the extremes first. What do you think are? Well, what are we not doing that we should be, or what do we need to stop doing?
I think a lot of it just has to do with things that are out of our control. So if you are a vet, if you're an academic, and you go and all of a sudden you're responsible for a program, or you're a consultant, you're on a advisory board for a program. Typically, you're talking to people who they're looking for your opinion because they don't know. And we're dealing with not only the institution and however that works, whether it's for profit or otherwise, you're also dealing with the Higher Learning Commission, you're dealing with the accrediting body for that college, and hopefully if you guys are in college or thinking about doing that, you're going to a college that does have some form of accreditation. You can get screwed otherwise, but we'll talk about that. And usually there's a lot of hesitation for where money goes. We really have to push and fight people that don't really understand or don't, we've been very fortunate, we've had some opportunities come up with Microsoft, so we have a couple of HoloLens kits, and we've been able to work out deals for software and the like, but most of that is just the networking side, right? And so much of it is a struggle in the realm of, I'm sitting in a room full of faculty and I'm trying to pitch and propose and change the curriculum, but I have to change minds, or I have to go through all of this political stuff. Just one brief example is, I was making a change to the curriculum, changing a course, right? Making it better. This is what it should be. super simple changes, right? Like nothing too ornate. The details don't really matter, but a room full of architects had to approve it. And this is a process that first it went to a council of people, architects, graphic designers, me. We had to approve it. Then it had to go to full faculty. And then it would have to go to this and this person and the program chair and then the dean and all, just for a simple change, right? I think improving those things is something that we can do better. These like facets, but that's all like the boring academic stuff that.
I think it points to something that is really interesting and important. I want to ask the audience here about this too in a minute, which is that most game design programs still are stepchildren of computer science or communication or architecture, art, or a variety of different things. We're very fortunate at Indiana that we have a media school, which is an entire school. It includes advertising and journalism and a bunch of other things, but we have our own game design program, and we've been given a lot of autonomy to create that program as we want without having to. Honestly, without having to go to a bunch of architects. We have so much bureaucracy. This is one of the big changes coming from industry is that the level of bureaucracy in academia was even though I thought I was prepared, it was a bit of a surprise. But we are fortunate just in that at least we have our program. Some of the biggest programs out there, University of Utah, USC, even Carnegie Mellon, places like that, the program has to sort of serve multiple masters, communication and computer science, or art and computer science, and that's like having two bosses. So it's always difficult. So I think one of the things we're going to see as the future goes on is game design as game design. At least I hope that's something I've certainly been pushing for as a thing sort of in itself. Let me ask though. I meant to ask this off the top. How many of you out here are? What's your interest in being here? How many of you are educators? Anyone here? Okay, a few. Developers. Okay. Potential people want to go to get a degree in game design? I see a couple. Or doing so already, right. Okay. Who have I missed? What? Students? Oh, yeah, people are doing it already.
Current
people who wanted in thought this was the extra credit signing? No.
Sorry to disappoint.
Yes, you have to deal with us instead. Good, and I'm really glad some students are here. That's, I think, really important. And will help us get better information out of this as well.
Maybe people who are deciding whether or not it's worth it to get a degree in game design.
Oh, that's an excellent. In fact, let's start there. I was looking at my notes. That's please. A great question. Let me ask it sort of broadly. I'll go first this time.
Please.
I get this question from parents all the time. I have. Mom and dad has just happened recently, both doctors with their daughter. Wonderful to see a woman coming in for a game design degree, and she was really pumped. She really wanted to do this. And the parents are like, okay, is this really a thing? Can you really do this? And I was able to tell them that the game industry is growing. It's growing far faster than the rest of the economy. It's definitely a real thing. You can make a real career out of it. But I also had to really caution them and caution their daughter, and this is why I go back to the chef analogy or the architecture analogy, that it's very, very competitive. And just getting a degree is in no way a guarantee that you will be able to get a job later on. And we try and do everything we can. This is one of the things I want to go to is how can we best prepare our students? But this question of is it worth it is, everyone's situation is going to be different. But is it something to a young woman back here looks like she might be interested in, go to school or go back to school or continue in school and get a game design degree? That's, let me just ask you guys, what are some of your, along those lines in terms of, is this worth it? What are your biggest questions or worries? Let me start with you and Frank. Yeah.
How many people are not 18? For example, if you are significantly older than 18.
Many.
Some of us are a little over 18. Yeah. Many.
Yeah, many. I've had, especially at ITT, where a lot of the, I don't want to say this in a bad way, but they kind of let everybody in, and there was a lot of interest. So there was like kind of a lack of a hurdle that I think would stop some people. And many of them were they were looking for a career change, right? And they had some funding from work where they were already employed, and that's where their interests lied, and that's kind of where they wanted to, have this shift in their career as they, were raising their kids or, starting a family or whatever. Many of them came from different walks of life, so it's not rare. But I am getting, at least now at Lawrence Tech, like the majority of our students are fresh out of high school. Very few of them are transfer students. Most of them are actually, because I run the game art program, and kind of by extension the coding side and the software development one, but most of our students are actually transfers from the computer science side.
Yeah.
But
I think just in general, the games industry is becoming much more diverse. It's much less straight white guys than it has been in the past, and is much more accepting of people from a broad palette. And I think we're starting to see that in education as well. Being a state university where we are, we have mostly kids coming out of high school, but we also have, I've got one guy who's a veteran who's been doing terrific work. And if we had, we would accept not anyone, but I mean, there's university requirements and all, but just in terms of acceptance in general in the industry, I don't think if you say, oh, I'm a woman or I'm over 18, that's not, I wouldn't even consider that. I mean, as a relevant factor. That's if anything, that's a positive rather than anything else. What else? Yeah.
Is it worth it based on a time commitment? I mean, I've already got my bachelor's in something else, but there are more than one avenues to take to get into the video game industry. Getting a degree is one unique path versus doing something like an internship and an apprenticeship with no formal education. Is it worth the time and the money investment to actually get a degree in?
That's an excellent question, and I don't think there's a single answer to it, but I can say, first of all, there are a lot of, I've been sort of pushing this in what I've been saying from an undergraduate point of view. There are a number of really good graduate programs out there for people who have degrees and typically don't have a degree in computer science or art or something like that, but have anything else. The one thing I'll say, whether you go undergraduate or graduate or don't at all, is there is a certain amount of education that's necessary there. The way that you show that, though, is by what you do, what you make. I said in an earlier panel that even as a professor, I've told this to my students, if you have to choose between get a degree or make a game, make a game. I mean, I love education, and I want to go back in a minute here to some of the things beyond just the straight game education, but a game design or game development degree without a game that you've produced, you can say, I worked on this, and preferably I worked on this with a team, is just not going to help you that much. It's certainly not as much as having a game where you can say, we made this. And yes, I have a degree in interior design or small engine repair, but we made this. That's going to stand head and shoulders above anything else. And one of the things that continues to astonish me is, and maybe it shouldn't, maybe I'm naive, how many of us start making games and don't finish them? You think, oh, it's not that hard to finish a game. No, it's really hard to finish a game. And the vast, vast majority of people who start one don't finish it. So if you can manage to finish it, you're already ahead of the game.
So I think that it also depends on what you're looking for, because you mentioned the amount of undergraduate and graduate programs that are around now, but very few of them are alike,
Yeah.
which is odd, because you think, okay, well, these degrees are going to be about making games, right? But if you think about it, games are very different from one another. They incorporate a lot of different forms of research and studies, whether it's art, code, whatever. We're always doing something new, and we're always in new territories. So are you strictly art and you want a combination of more of a fine arts background degree where you are doing traditional animation and could then go into visual effects, film, whatever, because it's a shared skill set, or are you strictly like you want a broad kind of general, I want to do a little bit of this, I want to do a little bit of that, I want to do more production and just kind of like be the glue, and there are many programs like that, right?
Can I just on that note say, in case anyone isn't aware of this, there's a thing called the Princeton ratings for a variety of different programs.
Princeton Review.
Princeton Review. Ignore it. It's useless. No, I mean, really, it's worse than useless, which is not to say their top programs are really good programs.
Yes.
But the Princeton Review has nothing whatsoever to do with Princeton College I think actually they took the name by buying like an old button factory or something in Princeton, New Jersey. Really, and I mean, there was kind of not an expose exactly, but a rant at least done on this a couple years ago. They send out a form, and some schools participate, some don't. But you're not going to get any good information by saying, "Oh, I'm only going to look at these top 10 schools on their list." They have very little correspondence to reality. What you want to do, though, is find a school that matches what you want to do. If you're interested in going to school, find a school that matches what you want to do. If you want to find someplace that does a lot of art or does really good narrative design, there's Worcester Polytechnic in Massachusetts does terrific narrative design. Not a very well-known school. I don't think it's on Princeton's top 10. But they really good narrative design. IU, frankly, we don't do so much narrative design. We do systems design a lot, but we don't do so much narrative design. So there's going to be different places that can have different things that you want to find something that matches the kind of games that you're really interested in making. And actually, on that note, before I get to some of the rest of your questions, but I wanted to broaden this out a little bit too. We talk a lot about art and programming and design, but one of the things that I think is, I'll say this, and I want to get your opinions and your folks' opinions too, but
Sure.
One of the things I think is really, really important that we're still kind of missing some of is having a broader education beyond just level design or, I don't know, rigging models. And those are important things. But, I have a one-page sheet for high schoolers who are interested in going into game design. If anyone's interested, I can make this available. But one of the things I say in there is that, you have to look beyond just, yes, you need English, you need math, you need science, you need to be able to communicate, you need to be able to work on a team. These are all incredibly important things. But you also need to know something about life. Go travel if you can, or at least go to the other side of town where you don't go. Find people who aren't like you. Learn about history and theology and anthropology and psychology. It doesn't mean you have to become a master of all these things, but you have to have some interest in these things. There's a game design, more than anything else that I know, rewards and really requires a really strong base in a broad education. One of the reasons that I was really hoping James Portnow would be able to be here is he went to a school called St. John's College, which is one of the last, if not the last college that does what's called a great books education, where they start with the ancient Greeks and go forward to the 20th century across 4 years. They do some specialization as well, but that's the school you end up knowing something about everything. And that's the kind of thing that game designers need to have. So I guess one of the things you can hear the advocacy in my voice. If you're interested in game design, or if you're doing it now, go out and learn more different stuff. Whatever it is you're not learning now, go do that. And make a game too. Anyway, but any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, what's wild is it could be anything. If you have an interest that you've explored that, I mentioned some of the older students that I've had, and they were more into automotive, and I'm from Detroit, so cars are the thing, and you can get a job like that. But that kind of became a thing. I had one student who ended up getting a job just doing lighting, and then that kind of became their specialty because they started lighting cars, and that was something that they were interested in doing. I don't know. A lot of people don't like to be the lighter. They're very few and far in between, and now that's what he's doing. He was on the Blizzard cinematic team and is
and it's an art.
running a division of Megascans. But I'm in the middle of not really a fight, but kind of like a battle, like a friendly battle, a debate. I don't know. About our foundational first year. So, all of our students in the art side of things, they go through a year of basic design courses. They have life drawing. They have all of these fundamental, okay, this has nothing to do necessarily with, the course talking about games. So we have many instructors who will try to, connect the dots a little bit. But and the students are just drawing, and they're painting, and they're talking about positive and negative space, and they're drawing circles, and circles and circles, and 100 pages a week of these types of things. And the students, they came to me and they're like, this isn't good enough. I'm like, you want 200 pages? What's the situation? But what they're seeing is that some students who are already good and have been drawing and had the fortune of going through a high school or something like that, and they had a really good art program, they're artists already. They can draw, they can communicate visually, they can shade, they can, whatever facet they got into, they can do that. And then the students who are entering, who are I mean, yeah, like I had some 3ds Max or CAD courses, or I've never done anything game related. They jump into these courses and they plateau. And no matter how much I try to help later on in the curriculum, or how we improve these things, it kind of stagnates. And we're trying to reform this first year to be very rigorous to the point where it's like, we don't want to be like the typical liberal arts, situation where, okay, you're going to fill up a wall, and if it's not good enough, I'm going to rip it off, and I'm going to this isn't good. You have to be better and tear your soul in two or something. We don't want to do that, and it's this really interesting balance, I think. But, do you want that? I don't know. Some people do. I think that some people thrive in that, and we're all very different learners. So,
and one thing I could say that we've come to at IU very consciously, in part because it's the kind of place we wanted to be, but also because I think it's where the industry is going, is we are very rigorous, and we do have very strong demands on our students. When we set up the program, we talked about being engineering hard or pre-med hard. This is a difficult program. And it's taken a while for some of the students to get that, because they come in as freshmen going, hey, games, and like, okay, this is going to be a little tough. At the same time, we have really gone to some lengths to be as certainly as inclusive as possible, but also as compassionate as possible, because I see that as part of the maturation of the industry as well, where we're not ripping things off the wall. We do let our students know when they aren't performing. And one example I'll give you is we have the last 3 semesters of the program. They're working in what we call our workshop classes. They're working as a team on a long-term game. So this is unusual, but we actually have them go for all told almost 2 years working on a game that they form a company and they release it. They own the game. The university doesn't own it, and it's theirs. Well, one of the things that happens is inevitably someone has a bad day or a bad week or a bad month, and that happens, and you start to slide a little bit in what you're doing. And we've put in place mechanisms where we can certainly have we have the team talk with them and say, hey, dude, you got to make it to our meetings. You've got to be doing your work. And if that doesn't work, then they meet with the professors and talk with them about it. And we put them, industry practice, we put them on a performance improvement plan called a PIP. Basically, for the next 4 weeks, here are 5 or 10 things you need to do. And if you don't do those things, you're off the team. Now, that doesn't automatically mean that they fail the class. But what it means is they get fired from their team. And we had some pushback when we did this originally, but what we said was, my opinion, it's a brutal lesson to be fired from a team, no question about it. But I'd much rather have a student learn this at age 20 than at age 30. And the steps go, you get fired from the team, and then you're freelancing. You need to make yourself useful to other teams, and you're working on a portfolio. And if you can't make yourself useful to other teams, first of all, that ought to tell you something. Maybe you have some work to do. And then you can work on your portfolio, and if you're just not making any progress at all, we'll fail you out of the class. And then instead of getting BS in game design, we have a BA in media that you can get. But you're not going to come out with a degree and a game and having been part of a team. And every time students come to us and say, hey, we got this problem, we don't know how to deal with it, with a person or a technical issue, one of the first things I'll usually say is, this is going to be a great interview story. Someone's going to say, tell me about a time you've dealt with a difficult problem or a difficult team member, or when you had a change in requirements, or all these things, and it's like they now all have direct experience with this kind of thing. Anyway, so I think that kind of raising the stakes, like you're trying to do too, I think is really, really important.
And it's funny because we can't fail everybody.
Yeah.
At ITT, I ran into that issue. As an aside, they would, this was very brief, they cut this out, but there were certain metrics that made all of the instructors earn more money, and it amounted to giving everybody A's and marking everybody as present for the day, right, attendance-wise. So if you didn't do that, you would make less money. And that's just the way that it kind of worked out, and it was this weird loophole, and I kind of called that into question, and I don't know. But I said then, and I still kind of say now, like, and this is an odd thing to say as a teacher and students who I hand grades to, but everybody should fail, right? Everybody should continue to fail. You're going to try new things all the time, and you're going to figure out what works and what doesn't. Your first project's not going to be the best, and all of that. So I have the students almost every single year. They're making a game, or they're working on a couple of little smaller proof of concepts, extremely small in scope, like make a simple punch-out game, and now we're just going through the iterations. And I try to get the students to have their work in front of people as much as possible so that they understand what is working and what isn't. So when I say fail, it's not just this boom hammer. It's okay, I tried this little thing and I thought it was a justified decision, making this gameplay element, making this little choice, but it doesn't always work out that way. And sometimes I can't just tell them, or some of the instructors can't tell them, yeah, that's not going to work out. They need to actually see it for themselves and kind of connect the dots. So
A couple things there. One is that I tell my students, if you're not failing, you're not learning. If you're not failing, you're not doing anything new. And if you're not doing something new in games, what are you doing? The other interesting thing in terms of the sort of the future of games education in general, is a lot of things we're talking about, I'm starting to see pool out into other aspects of education, non-game education. So this idea of failing in micro senses and having some stakes to it, but not just, oh, you failed the class. I mean, that's the ultimate backstop. But I teach mainly juniors and seniors. By the time they get to me, what I tell them is, you've had 14 years of learning to be a really good student. Now I need to learn. Now I need to help you learn to be a really good adult, a really good professional, and that means that a lot of things like showing up for class every day. You don't do that because you're going to get graded on attendance. I don't grade on attendance, but if you aren't there every day, you're not going to hear things. You're not going to be part of your team. Your team is not. You're not going to do the work you need to do, and they need to learn that. Oh, it's not this immediate. Yeah, I got an A on my participation grade. I was able to be part of a valuable member of my team and really do good work that way. And I'm starting to see more of that. We've actually had some conversations with some of the folks at the education school at our university about that. It's like, yes, please use this. That's wonderful stuff. Well, let me turn this over to you guys. I know there have been some hands that I haven't gotten to yet. So I've got one or two more points I wanted to make, but I don't want us to run out of time either. What are some of the concerns or hopes you have for the future of games education? Yeah, front. Right.
Game design program, and one of the things they at least struggle with a bit is because they have a game department which is under the computer science college, kind of you were talking about organizational structure. But so we have a class and we're like supposed to make a game, but it's just like all game designers, and so a lot of times you have like everyone's fighting over like the few students who know how to do art from the computer science department. And so I was kind of wondering, is that like a problem that's just like unique to that school? Is that something you kind of struggle with a bit? A room full of game designers where you get the other talent that you need to really make a game.
So, yeah. So just in case everyone didn't hear it, the question is about at any given school. If you're like RIT is a really good school, and their game design program is underneath computer science. Some places under art. Communications, things like that, you end up having sort of one center where you've got a lot of programmers or a lot of artists or a lot of writers. A lot of writers is not so common. Or in our case, we've actually had a lot of game designers. And a couple years ago, we didn't have nearly enough programmers. And it was like, oh, you know how to program? Come be on our team. And one of the reasons for this is because game development is so incredibly multidisciplinary. You have to have people who understand psychology and HCI, as well as programming and art and narrative and all these things. And so we try and teach as much as we can to our game design students. One thing I'll say is all of our game design students do program. You're not going to get away with being a game designer today and not know how to program. That doesn't mean you're going to be a good programmer, but you've got to be able to say, I have this idea, look, here it's a thing. It's a thing in software, but it's still a thing.
Our artists have 2 programming classes.
Yeah.
It's like strictly Unity, so they're in
Yeah, but that's still
C#,
sharp. Yeah, that's
right.
valid.
Basics, but applicable basics.
Right.
How to make things move.
So one of the things we're doing at IU, actually I was just answering some emails about that today, is we have a game development specialization within computer science and working on a campus-wide game design minor that lots of people will flow into. Actually, many years ago, I said I had an undergraduate degree in cognitive science. I got this early enough on that no one knew what it was. And I literally got told by my professors, you'll never get a job, which is a great thing to hear. So I had to write a thesis in defense of this thing, and part of it was how do new fields come about? And one of the things I went back to is the early days of psychology. When there were no psychologists, there were all medical doctors and biologists and other things like that, and they all sort of came to this field. And I think that's what's happening with game design right now, is we're in game development in general. We're seeing people come in from different areas, from art or all these different areas. And eventually, I think we're going to have enough meat there that we're going to be able, it's going to be a thing of its own, but it's not there yet. It will be eventually. But that's, I guess, part of the future.
So
yeah.
one of the,
Sorry, go ahead.
just
Yeah,
one
yeah.
last thought is, I mean, I've taught at a couple of different colleges, and we've had like those problems just in different ways where we had nothing but artists, and then we needed the coders. And what we found is, okay, we kind of consider the situation at that point, and we try to figure out the best avenue to resolve it, right? So game developers were problem solvers, so what's the best way that all of us can get something out of this experience without just like failing in kind of a bad way where everybody's just frustrated. And it's difficult to do still, given that, because you never really know like what the best route to take is. But we've had situations where we said, okay, well, our expectations for the final output are going to be different now. Or one thing that we stress, and now we're very fortunate to have the artists and the programmers and the people who kind of specialize in design or writing or audio or whatever kind of intermingled there. But we focus on paper prototypes earlier on, so that everybody has these like foundational understandings of what mechanics are, what aesthetics are, the dynamics of all of these different things. And if you're not familiar with MDA, mechanics, dynamics, aesthetics, it's a paper. If you just Google that,
It's a very short, readable paper. Yeah. Very
yeah.
good.
I'm not sure who I want to like.
It's
plug
Robin,
the person
Robin
who-
Hunicke. It's HUNICKE.
They're not here, are they?
Yeah. No, Robin's not here. No. Yeah, but it's very much worthwhile paper to read.
Yeah, but that's just
Yeah.
I thought about that. So, who are we?
The blue shirt, I think.
Take it slightly further in the future, education. Let's say for sake of argument, I have a preteen who will one day be.
Say, yeah.
What I'm finding difficulty in is giving her opportunities to make something concrete. Like, you can watch as many extra credits videos as you want. You can, there are some programs that we've had a lot of fun and success with, like Girls Make Games.
Yeah.
Studying at home.
Oh, so much.
Yeah.
So right off the top, first of all, Unity is free. There are more free tools today. So in terms of tools, there's things like Unity, but there's also a game that I found recently called Screep. Anyone here know it? It's a game where you learn to program in JavaScript by playing the game. Really interesting. It's short for scope creep, which is a bad thing, but Screep is a good thing. But things like Game Maker, there's a number of different tools like this. I would also encourage you to look at anything having to do with 3D printing, just because the lines between software and hardware are becoming more and more blurred all the time. One other thing I'll say is that games have been on the forefront technologically since at least the 1980s. I found some, I remember in the late 80s reading a really interesting paper on human-computer interaction. And then I thought, wait a minute, I've seen this before. And it turned out there was a game that had come out in the early 80s that had used these very same techniques, but no one had bothered to publish about it because it was just a game. So today, most of our computers' graphics cards are run by NVIDIA because we all want more polys on our screens. And NVIDIA is what it is because of games. But you know what NVIDIA's main thing is right now? Self-driving cars. They are powering self-driving cars. So that doesn't mean if you're a game developer, you'll know how to do self-driving cars. But there are some really interesting deep connections between that, AI, not just deep learning, but social AI, which is another one of things I focus on. Anything having to do with graphics or databases or client server, these are all on the programming side. On the design side, any kind of complex problem that's difficult for people to break down, as a game designer, you learn how to do that really, really well. So I've actually been a consultant for many years, and one of the things that people would call me in for is, we've got a difficult problem, no one here knows how to even categorize the problem. Can you come in and in an hour come up to speed on it well enough to talk to us about it? And it turns out that that's just one of the sort of meta skills you get as being a game designer. So, sorry, back to your question though, anything that is going to help your preteen make stuff, And like I said, I wouldn't. Sorry, I mentioned Unity. I mentioned Screep. The other ones I meant to mention were Construct 2. Is free and is really, if you're starting from nothing, that's what we, up to this year, that's what we were using for our freshmen who had no background at all. There's another one called the Godot engine, Godot, that's what we're using for our introductory students now, who we assume they have never programmed anything at all in their lives.
I see a lot of high schools using Game Maker.
Game Maker is definitely very good. And then there's things like Renderware. There's, Photoshop, Illustrator, any of these tools, those are not free tools, but there's just a ton of these that are so good that you can make really, really good stuff without having to spend any money, honestly. The other thing I'll say is, and this is kind of my own soapbox, is there's often a forked path in game design and game development and game education too, between content-driven versus systems-driven games. So content-driven games are shooters or anything with elaborate set pieces and lots of environments and lots of high poly characters and things like that. And those are incredibly enjoyable. They become like movies when we play them. The other side, though, is games that rely much less on the content and more on the systems involved. And that, for me, is really the future of game design in general. If you follow that route, it also allows you to make really cool games with a couple of squares on the screen. So you aren't bound by what you can do with art, or even sometimes with a lot of programming. But I think this is a time that's unparalleled in terms of the opportunities of things you can make. And then you make a game and you put it up on itch.io and get people to play it. And man, there's nothing like the feeling of watching a few dozen and then a few hundred or maybe even more people play a game that you made. There's nothing like that at all. All right. Yeah, in the scarf here.
So one of the things you mentioned earlier was it's really easy to start making a game, but not so much to finish it.
Right.
One of the things that keeps coming to my mind that is important for finishing is stuff like distribution, production, marketing, publishing. So we're talking like tables at the top, getting the materials in order to put together. Looking into some type of education, do you find those programs help find those answers, or is that more of a find the people that kind of know outside?
Well, I mean, a lot of it has to do with networking, but I mean, there is no step 1, step 2, step 3 to like effective marketing. You get your stuff out there, you're constantly creating new material to push. You time it right, you have it on social media, you post at the right time. Like there are all of these different approaches, like these methodologies that you could have, but there is no equation that amounts to your game going viral just like that. I think that's something that, if you're small scale, as far as like indie, you're working on something with a couple of people or just by yourself, you're just going to kind of go with the flow. I've done a lot of that myself, and I've submitted my content to different competitions. I mean, I submitted it to MAGFest, right? Get your game at MAGFest, and that's notoriety. That's people seeing it. You have some promo material so that, okay, yes, it's there, but they also have this business card or this takeaway that then is a connecting point so that they go to itch and play the game and
Right.
Talk to streamers and all of that. A lot of it is just emails and just filling out forms to submit things to this sort of venue and so on.
I'll just add that the good news is that it's easier today than ever, not just to make a game, but to distribute a game.
Yeah.
It's dead easy to put up on Steam or on itch, or even almost dead easy to put up on Apple or Google stores. The downside of that is that there are now more than 1,000 games being released every single day. So it's tough. And there is no formula. In fact, I'm doing I think it's more of a roundtable, not a panel, on the discoverability problem tomorrow, because this is an unsolved problem by any means. But discoverability, how do you know what games to play? And when you put a game out there, how do you know how do you get people to play your game? One thing I can tell you is, so networking is absolutely key. And some programs will help you with that more than others will. It just depends on their own internal bent, kind of. Just as one data point, Tim Fowers is a guy who's done a lot of really hit board games. Burgle Brothers paperback, hardback now. And he says he takes about a year before he releases a game to go to different festivals, like you were talking about, go to
Yep.
different places where he can, his games are all tabletop games. It's the same principle though. But just getting people exposed to it and say, oh, I played this cool game and I can't quite remember the name of it is. Oh, look, there it is again. And it takes at least a good year of really hard work to build up even the possibility of something going viral. It just, these days, having a game go viral without that is winning the lottery, and roughly the same odds. So anyway, let me go back to the very back. Yeah.
When you're trying to make an educational game versus a non-educational game, something that is very much just for fun versus something that is kind of work, what kind of marketing difficulties or how does that kind of play when trying to monetize something like that? Like when you have an educational game, not too many people are going to buy it because it's, like I said, it's work. When there's so many free games that you can go out and play. Is there help to be found on that aspect, or is it kind of you're on your own and you just kind of got to, hey, you guys gotta like math to like this game, or something like that. Like, I don't know.
So, as a tenure track professor, that's the route that my institution wants me to take. I should not be making games for entertainment. I should be making games for good. I should be making games related to the new nursing program and all of these other disciplines at the college, which is completely relevant. And, yeah.
It's valid,
but
right?
It's exceptionally valid and something that, you're not going to get the same kind of notoriety, but you can capitalize on more local awareness. And you should never just kind of, I'm just going to make this and it's just kind of on its own and it's going to float in this endless void and whatever. Something like that, you should talk to a college or talk to the state and figure out, most of those games are already funded through these grants and endeavors to get, people involved or interested. And we see a lot of that stuff pop up at, museums for little kiosk, interactive displays and the like. But
So I'm actually working on a game now with another professor and some other people to educational game to help people understand municipal water systems better. Because man, that's exciting. Let me tell you.
I'll play that.
The example I often use of that is, have any of you played Power Grid, the tabletop game? I brought this home and I said to my family, this is a game about making an electrical grid in Germany. And they're like, really? Are there dragons involved here someplace? But it's a great game, and so we've tried to approach this as a game first. The problem that I see with a lot of educational games, whether it's in uptake, actually getting people to pay them to play them, or much less monetizing it, good heavens, is that one of the fundamental characteristics of games is that they're something you don't need to do. They're non-consequential. They're something you can pick up and put down. It's if someone said, the amount of food you get next week is going to depend on how you do in the Settlers of Catan game, suddenly it's real, and so if someone says how well you do on this math exam is going to depend on how well you play this game, okay, hang on a minute, now I have an incentive, but now I don't want to, so this is one of the fundamental, this is a whole other conversation, a whole other panel, but it's one of the fundamental collision points between games and education. We want to make education better and to I'm not even going to use the word gamify. We want to make education better, but it's really difficult to do without sucking the soul out of a game that is educational. Mm-hmm. So it's difficult. And just with the water game that I'm doing, we got that funded via grant because that's how you get that funded.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, right over here. Oh, good, George. Yeah, good. Yeah, good place.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed my time there. The one thing that I noticed that we struggle with a little bit was actually kind of the opposite of what you mentioned here at the beginning of the panel, setting students up with the skills to network, meet people and whatnot. We at Mason, we do a very good job of preparing students through the regular channels of like, here's how you conduct yourself in a game interview, here's how you send your application out to as many places as possible. But we struggle with some of the finer things like meeting developers in your community, hitting like
Mhm.
the NBC, going to GDC. What's an effective use of your time at GDC? And I know when I went in, I would have liked to have seen more of that. We ended up founding a student SIG of the IGDA
Mhm.
to kind of fill that void a little bit.
That's good.
But it was something I would have liked to have seen more networking skills.
Yeah, I think it does go back to networking. I think having a student SIG for IGDA is great. I think going to GDC, the Game Developers Conference, is a really good idea, but it's also, I would question it. We send a few of our students. We actually have sort of a quasi-scholarship award. We don't send all of our students by any means, because you can go there and have a great time and get nothing out of it. So we want to make sure that the students we send are the ones that really are going to get something out of it. I would really encourage you to check out Protospiel. If you're interested in tabletop at all, it's a really great way to meet tabletop game designers, but all kinds of people go to these things. Any local clubs that you have, in addition to IGDA, for local developers. I'm trying to think, what are some of the other?
I mean, I ran into the same situation in 2006. I went into a 2-year degree, and I kind of started a student group with a bunch of other people who were interested in the very same thing. Michigan's a little slim, bunch of little bubbles. They're not joined together whatsoever. Now they are, thanks to the efforts of a lot of my colleagues and people who have gone and just kind of questioned, well, why not? So now with IGGA and all of this, a big key here is just being consistent. If you build it, they will come. If you keep coming, and if there's free pizza, whether they're Little Caesars, like, do you guys have?
Really
Little
doesn't
Caesars
matter.
now?
It's a pizza.
Yeah, like if you bring some food or make some snacks, like everything's going to be all right, and people are going to get together, and people are going to drop off, the numbers are going to dwindle, but you just have to remain steady, and that's going to then build this interest, and people will go, okay, wow, I'm going to look at meetup.com, and I'm going to look at the Facebook events, and I'm going to, oh, hey, did you know, like, Michigan has a Discord channel and a Slack channel. I use that all the time. I'm going to jump in there, and now you're aware of all these other college events and everything. And we interact with U of M in Michigan State. We interact with Ferris across I call it the West Coast of Michigan, or the East Coast. But we don't look at it as like, okay, this is competition. No, we're like, no, we're a family. We need to work together. We need to bridge the gap, and we need to, kind of make this a thing. And now I'm really close friends. I'm going to GDC, and who am I staying with in an Airbnb? But friends of mine from Grand Rapids now, who are teaching and doing the Grand Rapids, Ferris, Grand Valley type stuff. So
there's a lot of collegiality between people in the games industry, certainly, but also people in games education. And so reaching out and getting that kind of feeling going, I think, is a really, really good idea. Last one, you had another question.
I just wanted to kind of build off of some of the other comments I've heard. For one, I personally found GDC to be very valuable to go, and it's very expensive compared to like MAGFest.
It's crazy expensive.
Yes.
And I think you have to like make sure you register like as a student or something. But I personally found it very valuable. Even just going to panels like this one, and hear from the people sort of in the trenches and get the great stories. And then the other person who said sort of how do you get on the sort of distribution aspect, and I personally think that's one of the great things about crowdfunding is you get to practice that, and there's no penalty for failure. You don't get funded, so you don't get money, and all it costs you was the time. But you get to practice, getting the word out there, getting the advertising, and hey, if you're successful, you get money.
Yeah, so crowdfunding is a terrific thing. I think what Tim Fowler said to me was that he goes for a year before he does his crowdfunding, because he needs to build that up. Crowdfunding itself is a whole another thing, and it's become a real art. But it is a great way to frankly get your own community going and meet new colleagues too. It's a very cool thing. Last one, green shirt, sure. Yeah, well, I think we can do one more.
So I've been talking with my principals a few years ago, but I was talking with some people in IGDA about their programs and when they start students making games, when they have a 4-year program, how early and what kind of game. Really, sort of what happened was, I guess there's always like a bumper year where students don't really make games, but then they start more or less immediately making 3D games right after that. And that seems to be the most common thing. It's not everywhere, but that's the most common. And I was wondering, do you have any thoughts on like going in? This is something I proposed, but which starting with like a historical 2D game, like starting by making a game that should have come out in the 80s or 70s, and then working your way through game history. What do you think? Is that a good idea? Does that exist somewhere? Because I don't know if it exists really, not broadly.
I know we do some things like that. We take our freshman, sophomore students through not through the whole history, but they do look at sort of archetypal games at different points and make small versions of them. The thing is that making a complete game of something that was out 20 years ago is really not going to help you at all. You really need to be looking forward more than that. But being able to do game analysis and understanding what went into that game and making it so you can show that you understand that, I think can be really valuable. 3D, 2D, tabletop, we support them all at IU. There's a saying that I love, just on that note. I'm trying to remember the actor's name now, but actor, in talking to other actors, said about acting, he said, movies will make you famous, TV will make you rich, theater will make you good. And I really look at that as tabletop games are our theater. You can hide all kinds of things inside of an electronic game. In a tabletop game, you can't hide anything. And if you really want to strip it down and make the simplest possible thing that is also still really fun for a bunch of people around sitting on a table together, or playing together, a tabletop game is it's the most stripped down and yet one of the hardest things you can do. Making a tabletop game for me is a lot harder than making a digital game.
What about making a solo tabletop game?
You know what? Oddly enough, if you can make a solo game, you can make a cooperative game and vice versa. This seems like there's a really strong correspondence between the two. I've got a cooperative game I'm working on right now, and someone said, well, you're going to have a solo option. I hadn't thought of it. He said, yeah, you can totally, look, here it is. Like, oh, it was right there. So, yeah.
So we have our students doing paper prototypes, paper games, very cost effective, very quick to do, very easy to kind of help get over that initial hurdle of, okay, what does it take to make a game?
Yeah.
We got to understand the rules and all of that, and it's just drawings on paper and scrap paper. And then they're jumping into very small scope projects in GameMaker and Unity in the very first year. And this is artists and the programmers joining up. And we also get a lot of other computer science students taking the course too, because they need to satisfy elective requirements and the like. Both sophomore and juniors go through an integrated game studio sequence, and this is 16 weeks to start and finish a game prototype. This is also something that culminates in 2 exhibitions, one that's with colleges like U of M, State, and Eastern and the like. We're trying to pull everybody together and just do a cool collaborative event. And then we also do one that's more like, okay, hey, invite your friends and family, we're gonna do this big event, but it's by far the first time they ever show off the game. They go through this process of, okay, we're going to pull in the artists and we're going to just put them through the ringer and talk about their plans, and and it's like every single week. Coders we do the same thing with, like every little facet, and they can do whatever they want, 3D, 2D, depending on scope and our guidance is as best as we can do. And the final year, we have something that's a little bit different because the artists can still pair up with the programmers, but the artists go through a thesis sequence that's like a traditional BFA fine art background sequence in which they write many papers, they do a tremendous amount of research, they work within a gallery space and then exhibit within that space after a year. And it's kind of this big long culmination of, okay, well, I've made some games already, and I'm going to make another one. I'm going to specialize in, I want to do, heaven forbid, character animation, sculpting. I want to do level design type stuff. I've got this really cool idea, and I want to execute that. And it's, as long as it's within the realm of employability, right? Then it's okay. But
we need to go. I did want to give a shout out really quickly to an indie game I saw here at MAGFest called No Good Can Come of This. If you haven't seen it yet, go take a look at it, and look at it from the point of view of what had to go into this for art and programming and design. It's a very fast, fun, design-heavy game that anybody could make. Point is, not anybody did make it. These guys made it. Anyway, thanks very much. I really appreciate you all being here.
yeah, thank you guys.